George, we have about 6 of our pilots here.
Oh, thank you.
Dave Burrell.
Everyone's still filtering in. How's our audio is working pretty good in here? Yeah. All right. Well, it's 10 o'clock. We're going to get started on time. I'm sure people are still joining us by Zoom. I'm George Berkeley from the Maritime Pilots Institute, and I've been invited here to facilitate this meeting. And it's a 2-part meeting. So we have some presentation material up front, and then the second part is a roundtable discussion. We are Zooming it, so if you want to talk, you're going to have to walk up to the podium and speak so that you're in the computer, and the people out there in our Zoom world would be able to see you. This will be recorded, and we'll make the recording available afterwards for anyone who wants to distribute the conversation. So I'm going to introduce Captain Clint Winiger, who's going to start us off. And you can see from we're here to talk about vessel power derating. And then after Clint, Mr. Jan Hagen from DNV is here to talk to us about some of the technical side of this problem. And then we will have an address by Captain Viso from the APA. I'll be coming and going from the computer because I have to share the screen and do other things like that.
You got a fancy operation here, George.
It's really fancy. Yeah. Okay, Captain Clint Winiger.
Thanks everyone for coming. Today, we're just looking to start a conversation about EEXI and the push for reducing emissions and some of the vessels here starting to derate their engines. I really want to special thanks to the Coast Guard, ABS, Intertanko, APA, really been helpful over the last couple of weeks as we started working towards an understanding on this. Thanks everyone that showed up today and everyone that's online. Welcome to the discussion. Anything else? Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Jan, would you like to start with us? So I'm going to share our screen, Jan. Yep. And get you going on it. If it's working.
Yeah.
Okay, Jan. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
We'll get this close to you so you can talk.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this meeting, and thanks to George and the Houston Pilots Association for putting this together and discussing this very relevant topic. So I'm glad to be contribute and to maybe shed some light on sort of technical requirements on the EEXI, the engine power limitation that some ships have to implement, and sort of what is expected to look for on board different vessels. So my name is Jan Anderson. I'm based here in Houston in the DNV office. I'm part of what we call the Maritime Business Development part, but my role is primarily being on environmental regulations for the last, well, I said 10 years, and especially with a focus on the EEXI, CEI, and the sort of focus on greenhouse gas reduction from shipping after the IMO implemented their strategy in 2018. So first of all, I wanted to just show a little bit about the regulatory framework is the basic on why the IMO and has sort of put this focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from shipping. So as you might have heard, they come up with an ambition in 2018. It was recently updated, but this ambition, they put it in 2018, was the basis for the EEXI regulation and its carbon intensity indicator regulation, which is focused on the short-term goals. But those are still the same from the ambition, even at the update at the latest NPC meeting in July. That is to reduce the transport efficiency, the carbon intensity of shipping by 40% by 2030. That is the focus on the EEXI regulation. But then the longer term goals from the IMO is also to reducing the greenhouse gas intensity, the well-to-wake emission of all energy used on board ships by 30% in 2030 and increasing to 70% in 2040. With a goal to even go 80%, and then a 5% share of sort of non-greenhouse gas technology, zero greenhouse gas technology by 2030. And the overall goal is sort of net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050. That's the goal the IMO has set. So now they develop these different regulations to show how we get there. The path, I mean, the goal is set, but how do we get there is sort of the hard. So they started back in 2018 with the data collection system. So that's a way to collect all the fuel consumption data, how the vessel has been operated, because there were really no system in place to understand exactly what was the international shipping's efficiency. So that started to collect the data, and that is sort of the basis for some of the upcoming regulation. Then in 2023, they also implemented the EEXI, which stands for the Energy Efficiency Index for existing ship, which is an extension of the EEDI, which was actually implemented back in 2013 for all new building vessels. So Energy Efficiency Design Index. But the change was that EEXI is then retroactive to all ships. So it's a regulation that's been in place for ships built after 2013, but then also then extended to all existing cargo and passenger vessels. At the same time, they also implemented the Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan, Part 3, which basically says how ships are going to comply with the CEI regulations in the years to come and have a more rule-based and framework in place to do this. And then the last thing was also this carbon intensity rating, which is an operational efficiency, so not a design efficiency. So this focuses on the actual consumption of the vessel, and they will be reduced according to trajectory set by the IMO. So we also know that other regulatory bodies like the EU also have additional regulations that will apply in certain regions. This will also affect, of course, ships worldwide. But in order to meet the long-term goals of the IMO, not only efficiency or fuel consumption reduction will be needed, but also the use of carbon neutral fuel or even zero emission technologies. But if you look at the energy efficiency, the EEXI, so it's a ratio between the CO2 consumption, CO2 emission in ships per ton divided by the reference speed multiplied by the dead weight. So in a way, it's a CO2 in tons per ton mile. So you can, in a way, compare it to the miles per gallon that you have on your car. So these are based on the design condition. So the formula is actually the same that was applied to the vessels that was built after 2013. So it sets a certain requirement for what this index will be for ships. So it's to say it was an applicability to all vessels. So it's calculated once in a lifetime. You meet the requirement and it's certified by your class society, and then it's completed. So it's a design index that the ships have to meet, and now from 2023. It's, as I say, an extension to all ships in service from the EEDI regulation. And it's need to be complied with sometime in 2023, depending on the first periodical survey and a new energy efficiency certificate is added. So in that sense, more and more of these vessels in 2023 will come out and implement, let's say, an engine power limitation to be in compliance with it. So we see more and more vessels having to apply to this. And I think, as I say, the key point with the EEXI is that it is a theoretical calculation to be at certain reference conditions. So it's almost like the test bed in your car or the lab. It's based on a certain speed. The speed is the speed that the vessel has at 75% load of the engine at fully loaded condition at the thermal load line draft. So the reference speed is at 75% of a fully loaded vessel, at 75% of the engine power for a fully loaded vessel. That is the engine power that is used in the calculation. So how did the IMO come up with what the requirement should be? So back in before they implemented the EEDI regulation in 2013 or 2012, they took an analysis of all the ships that was built between 2001 and 2009. They calculated a reference line for all different types of vessel, as you see on this graph. So for bulk carriers, for tankers, container ships, general cargo vessels, they did a statistical analysis of all the design parameters of those vessels. And they created the average, which you see is this solid dotted line, which was the average. This was the reference line, which is a function of the size of the vessel in deadweight. Then they say this is the average, and then stepwise, the design of vessels should go below that reference line, 5, 10, 20% in different phases. So that was the basis for the required EEXI. And then you calculate the attained EEXI using the formula that I showed on the first one, and you see if the vessel meets it. If it doesn't meet it, you have to implement some measure. And the most measure that most vessels had to implement was to reduce the engine power to a certain limit to bring it below the formula. So if they implement this engine power limitation or shaft power limitation, it's a device, whether mechanically or electronically, then that limits that engine power to a certain percentage of the rated MCR of the engine. So mechanically, it limits, let's say, the fuel rack, which is a simple solution you just have for mechanical engines. You could have a fuel limiter. And the key is that in most cases, it's always an overridable power limitation. So the full power of the engine is still available, but it can be overridden if the master needs that extra power. It can also be for electronic engine. It can be implemented in the governor as an electronic limit or in the propulsion control system. If you use the shaft power limitation solution, then you basically need a measurement device on the propeller shaft, like a torque meter that will measure the engine power at any time. And if the power for some reason increases towards the limit, it will be either be limited or be receive an alarm on the bridge, and the master have to either reduce the power to come below the limit. So yes. If there's some burning questions, I guess we can take them, but I don't know. It's hard for the people to hear it.
Listening and watching, we can talk now.
Yeah.
We're gonna have an introduction after you're done, and then we'll. Go ahead, JJ, you got something?
I mean, it was a really good question. What the EPL or the Chipotle, like, why would one be better than the other, or why would a ship owner pick one or the other?
Yeah. So the question was, why would you choose an EPL versus shaft poly? And I think the answer is of course, sometimes what's simpler and easier to implement for the particular engine maker. It's also, of course, if you have the mechanical limiter, that's, let's say you have to have that on the fuel rack down the engine room, it will definitely take a little more effort and time to release that instead of having the master just having a push button. So it's a question about if it's technical feasible to have there's an engine power limitation or a shaft power limitation as well. So I think most solutions we see is the engine power limitations, but of course for different if they already have a shaft torque meter already on board, it might be easier to install that as well. So it's really up to the ship owner what's simpler, and it's also a little bit of what needs to be approved by the class society for the different solutions. Yeah. So if you look at different solutions, on electronic or shaft pulley solutions, there are different solutions that are accepted by EEXI and by FLAG and the class societies. So you can have let's say if you have electronic solution and you have a propulsion control system, it can just monitor or have in the electronic governor, it senses where the electronic fuel index is, and is limited by that. And if the captain needs to override it, he can then override it directly from the bridge. In the original IMO regulation, there was a sort of requirement that it has to be an override function on the bridge with a button, and we see a lot of solutions like that still. But also, if you have a torque meter, then that should also have a direct link to the electronic governor from and a limiter there. And with that solution, with a torque meter, you also need a recording and processing device on the bridge. So in case the master has to override it, it will be recorded on the bridge and be available for flag and class to review that the reason the captain override the power limitation and how long it was overridden for. And it also has to be looked upon in the bridge. In the EEXI in unified requirement, this also allowed to avoid this limiter from the torque meter to the electronic governor, but have an alarming function on the bridge. So if the power goes over the limit, there will be an alarm, and the captain and the master has to take the appropriate action to limit the power in the alarm. And as well, it has to be recorded in case he went above the power limitation. So this is an example, just a picture of sort of a mechanical limiter with a seal function. So in case it has to be removed, the seal had to be cut, be recorded, and then put back with a same seal that is given, let's say, by the engine manufacturer. And these solutions have been implemented several times. And it can also be parameter set in the engine control sim, and it's password locked. So, the crew cannot go in and change the power limitation. They can override it, but they cannot change the power limitation. That has to be done and is verified by the class society that is done and is password protected, let's say by the OMM. So the main requirements for any EPL or shaft power solution is, first of all, it has to be a power limited. It has to limit the power to the maximum what is allowed by the EEXI technical file and the onboard management manual to the calculated value. There has to be an overridable ability. So the master has to be able to override the EEXI limitation and access the full power if needed in times of emergency or even in terms of maintenance. As I say, for some solutions, there should be an alarm indication. For the electronically solution, there should be alarming function. So an alarm is indicated if the master exceeds the power. There should be also indications on, let's say, a light or other kind of indications of status, and also whether the system is taking the relevant measurements and recordings. So the recording, if you use, you have to record it either electronically or, let's say, for a mechanical solution, at least recording manually in both the engine logbook and the bridge logbook in case the power is limited. And that has to be sent to class as the RO and flag as needed. It also has to be tamper-proof. So this is the sealing device that, in case it's overridden, that it should not be easy to change the limit. It has to go back to the same setting as it was before. As class, as an RO, this is a statutory regulation. So the class society verified the solution on behalf of the flag. So when a class survey go on board and verifies that the EPL and the EEXI solution implemented, it's verified that the power limitation is in accordance with the approved documentation, and it's tested accordingly. There is no maximum time as such for a power limitation to be removed, but typically the maximum that we've seen is maybe a couple of minutes, but it's really in the regulation. It doesn't say it has to be within 1 minute, 2 minutes, or anything like that. But it should be specified in the onboard management manual how long it will typically take to override the power limitation. It's also the surveyors who's also ensure that if there is any updates needed in the pilot charge or the maneuvering charge because of the power limitation, that should have been updated on the bridge. And then master has to confirm that this has been updated on those charts on the bridge that's available to pilots and others. So there's few documents that forms the basis for the class as an RO to approve the solution. First is the EEXI technical file, and this has to be approved by the class society. It specifies the main particular of the vessel. Is also the main purpose of this is that it shows that the company or whoever they have used for this calculation has calculated the required an EEXI according with the guidelines from the IMO, and if there is an engine power limitation needed or chosen as a solution, then that value should be specified in this EEXI technical file. This should be approved and stamped and should be available on board the vessel as well. But this has to be improved by the RO before an engine power limitation can be implemented. The other one is this onboard management manual, typically called OMM. This also has to be approved by the class society as an RO, recognized organization. And if there is a power limitation, an EPL or a shaft pulley, this has to be is mandatory and has to be approved. So that is something the ship and the master and the crew should be available to show and be familiar with as well. And it shows it's going to have the technical description, what type of solution. Is it a mechanical limiter? Is it an engine power limitation? Is it a shaft power limitation? It should describe how the shaft power can be limited and unlimited. It describes how it's verified during normal service as well. Any service and maintenance, if there is some kind of technical installation needed. It should also identify who's responsible for maintaining the system and recording in case there is any power limitation that needs to be exceeded. And also it should be clearly identified how to notify the authorities, whether it's class, flag, port, state, in the case it has to use the power reserve. And there should also be a record book for unlimited. Oh, that disappeared. Okay.
PowerPoint, power.
Yeah. Let's see. Get the page to move forward. Let's see. Let's see. I think there's one more slide. So
Get another slide to go. Okay, let's get on the PowerPoint.
yeah. So I also we looked at the statistics so together with some because we of course we maintain the data of how many ships that is actually needed to implement this solution. So as of now, we have approximately approved a little over 50% of all the vessels in our class that needs to have this in place, and it's been implemented. So you can see about 80% of bulkers would need some kind of power limitation. And it kind of goes down to, let's say, cruise passenger vessel, but only 20% has need to implement some kind of shaft power limitation. Now, the question we get is, well, how much shaft power limitation is typically applied? And this is some data that actually, because we've gotten these discussions, we're now digging out. So I'll share that as well when we had that is. But typically the power limitation, as we've seen it, is everything from 1 to 20, 25%. That's the range where the power limitation is. In some ways, we haven't really, there might be some outliers where it's gone up to 40% or more, but typically the power limitation is in that range in order to meet the EEXI. But of course, it can depend a lot on the ship and the age of the ship and the type of power installation they had in as well. One thing to be sure so when the EEDI was implemented, there were some concerns that the ships would limit their power below a safe maneuvering power. So part of the EEDI regulation, which is also, of course, applicable to the EEXI regulation, is that there is a minimum propulsion requirement for bulk carriers, for tankers, and for general cargo vessel. And if it's an overridable power solution, this is not checked, because then the full power is still available. But if they choose to implement a permanent power limitation, a derating of the engine, let's say removing a turbocharger or permanently blocking the power of the engine, then the class society needs to verify that the minimum propulsion requirement for that ship type is not exceeded. So this regulation is still in place, but with an overridable power limitation, the full power as it was installed shall still be available. So some additional note, it should be made clear that the solution is a power limit. It's not a torque limit or an RPM or a speed limit. So the full power or the torque, there might be some torque limitation because of the engine manufacturer, but it's a power limitation. So in that sense, the response of the engine, the way the transit response should be the same as it was before the engine power limitation was implemented. As I say, overriding from the bridge is the recommended solution, because it's in a way the better than have to call down to the engine room and have the chief engineer go back and mechanically remove the mechanical limiter, but it is an approved solution as well if they have to remove this. As I say, the EPL shaft pollution shouldn't have any function on the ramping, the speed or the transit response of the engine. It can, for electronic engine, it can be included within the governor, the remote control system, or other propulsion control system. For non-conventional system, this electric vessel, it can be implemented within the electrical control system as well to control the shaft power of the propulsion motors, electrical propulsion motors. One thing I think is important to realize, and maybe be important also for pilots, is that in case you maneuver in a dangerous area, the ship can remove or deactivate the power solution, and they just have to report that in the log. Unless the power reserve is used, there is no need to report that back to the RO or the flag, just in case if they exceed the power limitation. So it is a way that you can sort of have the ship have the full power available, and they don't necessarily have to override, but only in case that they need the power during maneuvering, they have to then report it back to the RO. So also from the IX, just to say that it has to also be implemented in the safety management system. Of course, that they do this as well. The reason that they can overlimit as worse weather, piracy, traffic separation zone, or maneuvering or in maintenance. But at the same time, the engine should probably be manned during those instances. So in case they need a power reserve, it will be. I also include some links there, our links, also the 2 documents from IAX and also from IMO that might be relevant to understand more of the background of the regulation. Right. And this is what I had, and maybe there are some questions there.
Sir, thank you very much. It's very informative. I appreciate it. I know that the room probably is more leaning towards the safety aspect of some of the Norman O'Shaughnessy still tankers. Once again, I appreciate the presentation. It was quite informative. And looking about the room and seeing a lot of our industrial colleagues here, I can sense that maybe the room is more concerned about the safety aspect of the power rating and the effects on the maneuverability of the ship. But through various times in your presentation, you mentioned recording and reporting. And so I personally am at a loss as to the reporting requirements and what that does in regards to an EEXI rating or calculation at the end of the year. And we keep hearing this term about MARPOL violation, right? And I think it's a misused term in this regards, that each time we go past the limit, we're in violation of MARPOL. And so that would be the first part of the question. Is it considered a MARPOL violation? And then number 2, is that extra greenhouse gas NOx emissions at that time, is each and every one of those things a responsible sort of event, or does that all just go into the calculation at the end of the year where it's aggregated into what the ship does for its total EEXI rating? Can you address either of those?
Yeah, so on the first one, so it is allowed to exceed the power limitation, and the conditions under that should be specified in the OMM. So in some sense, to override a power limitation is not per se a MARPOL violation. What would be a violation was not to report it to the RO or the flag, and if it was done for not one of the reasons that is acceptable to override a power limitation. And on the second question, so yes, you do a fuel consumption reporting of the every year, but the same thing there are conditions for where a fuel consumption would be exempted from the CEI rating. You have to report the consumption, but it could be removed from the CEI rating if it's one of those conditions that is what we call the voyage exemption part. So any consumption, let's say during safety of the vessel or life, could be exempted from the CEI rating.
Well, I would posit just on a follow-up that any transit in the Houston ship channel is a safety issue from get-go. Even whether you're passing or not, it's still a very enclosed space of water, and I'm sure the pilots and tug guys would agree with me on this, that the whole transit could be considered a safety issue.
And your question also included this end of season rating, right? A, B, C, D.
Correct.
And kind of a forecast is if you were to consistently override in every port the ship goes to, is that going to downgrade her class rating with her flag state? And she ends up being a C. And how does that affect a ship? What's the idea?
Well, I mean, the reporting of fuel consumption, all consumption has to report it, whether you're in port, whether you're maneuvering, right? So I think that the highest consumption is, of course, when you are sailing. So there is no blanket exemption for maneuvering in ports from CEI requirements. But if you have to divert the vessel or have some additional consumption outside the normal operating condition, then that could be exempted.
Yeah, hi, good morning. This is Naval Ranki with Executive Shipping Services. I'm going to talk a little bit from a ship manager's point of view and why we are hesitant to use the EPL. Now, MEPC 3356, these are the guidelines for Chapolian EPL to comply with EEXI requirements. Article 3 there, 3.1, just bear with me, I'm going to read it out to you. The use of power reserve is only allowed for the purpose of securing the safety of a ship or saving life at sea, consistent with regulation 3.1 of MARPOL Annex 6. Within brackets, example, operating in adverse weather and ice-infested waters, participation in search and rescue operations, avoidance of pirates, and engine maintenance. Nowhere in this paragraph is it mentioned maneuvering. There is no talk about issues in inland waterways. Now, this is what kind of puts people on the bridge under the offices. Well, the IMO doesn't specify anything about inland waterways, pilotages, so why would I want to do this? And then the other part is the reporting. Even if you do not use the reserve power, you still have to log down 10 items here every time you kind of override that limitation. So that's extra work for everybody on the ship. I agree it's safety, but if IMO would have just specified additional instances where this can be overridden, there would have been no hesitation at all from either the ship staff or the office. And coming back to some other issues which we have all the time, PSC, vetting inspectors, every time they see this, they're going to jump on the ship and they need to see what you have done. And it's a nightmare, basically, if you got to do this. Every time in every port, inland waterways, that's the ship owner's perspective on this as of now. If things change, we know safety takes precedence over everything else, but this is what I'm more, this discussion will help alleviate these concerns of ours. Thank you.
No, I think that's
Thank you,
a
sir.
very good feedback. And I think, yeah, we are sort of in the experience building period of this. So we are collecting information for when ships are, needing or asking to override. And then, of course, yes, we would, I think the flag and the IMO will, as needed, try to interpret these kind of conditions. And it's an ongoing discussion.
Thank you, Jan. We have a few other people that want to speak at this from a different perspective, so. And then we're gonna have a roundtable and try to gather all our thoughts together. Jan, that was awesome.
All right, thank you very much. And I'll be around. So any other questions, let me know.
Yes.
Captain Viso, I'm going to try to hook you up to this. You're next on our list is Captain George Viso, the president of the American Pilots Association. Let me see if I can allow you to share. So I'm going to stop the share here. Are you able to speak, George? Can you unmute?
I think so.
There you are. We can hear you loud and clear, sir.
Okay, thank you, George. First, I'd like to thank you, George Berkeley, for organizing and assembling this conference call to discuss what we consider a very important safety issue. The issue evolves from an emissions concern, but has the potential to produce unintended consequences that can compromise the safety of vessels operating in constricted pilotage waters. We certainly support efforts to operate ships in a more efficient and environmentally conscious manner, but the application of these regulations in pilotage water seems to miss the mark, in our opinion. Complying with these regulations from departure to arrival seems simple enough, but why restrict the maneuverability of a ship in the most congested and physically restricted phase of its operation? When maneuvering a vessel in restricted waters and close proximity to infrastructure, the pilot or any operator needs the full capability of the engine package that was designed for that vessel. Imagine the braking power in your car being limited, and then you have to deal with a car darting out in front of you or having to accelerate suddenly to avoid a danger. We would like to see discussion and movement towards allowing overridable engine power limitation practices in pilotage waters at all times. Compliance with one MARPOL regulation, EEXI in this case, will lead to another MARPOL violation if we have a fuel spill from a collision. At the APA, we've engaged with the Coast Guard as early as March of this year. And that led to them posting in Maritime Commons a directive for people to make sure that the pilot card representation of engine power was properly represented what was actually available. We're going to meet with Coast Guard headquarters in October and hope to flesh this out. But again, George, thank you for putting this together, and I appreciate everybody participating. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we thought we'd also, we'd have some voices from the field. So Captain Ledet, you're there. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Captain Jason Ledet is with the New Orleans Baton Rouge Steamship Pilots, who's on the Mississippi River. He's the chair of their safety committee, and he's been collecting reports from the pilots on the experience they've had with ships that have EEXI. Go ahead, Jason.
All right. I gotta enable screen share, George.
All right. I'm up. Couple more. Help me out. Right here. All right, there you go. Thank you. Crowdsource the answer. Can you get in there now, Jason?
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. One second, sorry. As I enable it. There we go. All right. So we've been collecting some information here, like George had said, different pilot cards. Most recently, we had the Stolt Breland come in, and one of our pilots took this picture here. This is their EEXI meter, and he spoke to the captain about it throughout the transit, and you know they're utilizing this to monitor it the whole way down. As you see the big sign there, exceeding EEXI limit is a MARPOL violation. But he said, as he went down the river, you know, here in the Mississippi River, we have a lot of extreme turns, downbound following current. Right now, the water's pretty low. We only have about a knot to knot and a half of current. But as he went down and made some of these extreme turns here on the river, that power indicator was going up and the load on the ship's engine was increasing. And he was watching the captain reduce the ship's revolutions during the entire transit. Anytime it approached the yellow or red area, he would reduce the revolutions. So this is just one of the examples. This ship is also, I found out, has a Yara Marine Fuel Opt system on board. And it gives them the ability to directly control the speed, fuel consumption, engine power, or a combination thereof based on the command set. And it also adapts propulsive power to changing environmental condition and erase costly variations in speed and power, leading to increased efficiency, fuel savings, and emissions reduction. So it seems that they're only truly concerned with emissions and not the actual maneuverability of the ship. We have the Ginga Bobcat as well. I had this ship myself. She was built in 2010. She's experienced an 83% reduction. 105 revs was previously full ahead. As you see here now, it's 95 revolutions. They consider the 105 C speed now and require you to get a 10-minute notice. The full C speed used to be 133. So you're not available, none of that is available either. This one most recently was the, I want to say this was the Stolt, sorry. Yeah. So this was the original pilot card. It was a Stolt ship. I forget the Stolt efficiency, something like that. So you see the different RPMs here at 79 was full ahead. And then we go to the new 70 was full ahead, and they have little cutouts of all the different revolutions pasted to the propulsion particulars, everything that's been updated. This captain, this ship was built in 2000, and he said that they were not required to put in place any of these EEXI revolution reductions, but as you see very clearly, it's right there on the maneuvering board now. There's this ship here, Asian Summit. Here we go. Here's another pilot card. It shows maximum power 6,900 kilowatts, 6,900 horsepower at 9373 kilowatts. So our pilot went through and had them show all the different revolutions that you're actually getting at what horsepower, what kilowatt. So as you see, full ed here is 4,000 kilowatts, which is equal to 5,400 horsepower. 4,400 at 80, which was C speed, he said. So we're definitely seeing the reductions across the board here already. We had one ship where we just recently went to 50 feet here on the Mississippi River earlier this year. And it was the Santa Amelia. She sailed with 49 feet out of CMT, loaded coal ship. So she had to transit several of our extreme turns here. But this was the pilot card. And then also same type of situation here. It shows your max power, max available kilowatts, max available horsepower. And in reality, after the pilot did all the calculations, you can see it's much different. It's a much different reality. You're looking at 4,972 horsepower at full ahead maneuvers, revolutions. They didn't report the max RPMs. The pilot card shows only the maximum power. And it doesn't report how many RPMs it is at the individual engine bells. This pilot also on this transit had to get an escort tug. This ship experienced a casualty coming down the Mississippi River, makes College Point here, and you'll watch it. This is during the original transit. It barely makes College Point. You watch the vector as she comes around. This whole area over here is at a barge fleet. So he barely gets it around before taking out a barge fleet. Can never really get it around again into the ranges. We go a little bit further. This is where the actual casualty happens. He's making this next turn. The ship just doesn't respond at the reduced revolutions with the following current. Nearly misses the tow that's coming up the bank here as well. So second pilot that got the ship, sailed it out of the anchorage, knew that there were issues. One of our most experienced pilots took it down the river. After the first turn, he said he realized he was in trouble. He had an escort tug stay with him the rest of the transit, making all of these turns. Like you said, he knew he was in trouble from the jump, so he had an escort tug. Halfway through, put him in indirect mode, and was able to successfully navigate the rest of the route. Had a near miss with the bridge and another vessel here. All right. So currently here we have an MSIB in place that, kind of repeats what the CFR states while vessels are underway on the lower Mississippi River. And I think, it does what it needs to do, but at the same time, we need to add something into it that, I don't know if everybody can see that. Yeah. That also notes this EEXI, the new IMO regulations. It is a Coast Guard, it's a code of federal regulation, but also for each local port, we should have something very specific in there. Very, very similar. It says, they must be able to override all the load limiting programs and the automatic acceleration limiting programs. But we saw one letter from a company that said that they were not allowed to override even in extremis based on they didn't want to have to do reporting. So, we asked that the Coast Guard maybe step up here and, amend this MSIB to include EEXI, CII, EEDI for all future built vessels as well. All right, George.
Well, thank you, Jason. You can stop your screen share. I think you already have. Yeah, okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Captain Ledette before we move on to Captain David Adrian from Matagorda? Wanted to give you two people from the field so you could see it. We're trying to address everybody's concerns from the field to the regulators to our class societies, everyone in the room. Captain Adrian, are you out there, sir? I'm looking for you in our list of people. There you are. If you can unmute yourself.
Okay,
And
thank you,
can
Mr. Berkeley.
Thank you. Hey, David.
Okay. Thank you for asking me to speak today. Pilots are not immune to the changes in vessel design and engine power over the last 40 years. Vessel sizes has increased while engine horsepower has relatively decreased. In the 60s, we were moving 25,000 ton freighters with 10,000 horsepower. Today, we're moving 90,000 ton vessels with the same or even maybe 12,000 horsepower. Even more recently, vessels are required to switch to low sulfur marine fuel instead of the heavy fuel oil. The significant reduction in BTUs reflected directly at the vessel engine's output, and the vessels were able to adapt as well as the pilots. However, naval architects are designing vessels with smaller rudders, smaller propellers designed for fuel efficiency, not maneuverability. However, none of these reductions are nowhere near what we are seeing with the computer-based engine power limiting for EEXI. These changes in emission standards, which have been methodically reviewed and studied by engineer and climate experts, may indeed help the environment, but they could ultimately come at the cost with a reduction of safety margins for these vessels in the confined waterways where they load their cargoes. The pilots in Matagorda Bay have seen significant reduction in vessel power over the last 6 months. Our entrance channel has some of the strongest currents in the country, ranging between 3 and 6 knots with the normal lunar conditions and easily exceeding 7 knots in periods of strong weather. While we suspend vessel movements in the strongest of the currents, we negotiate our 300-foot wide entrance with currents over 4 knots almost on a daily basis. Our pilots are experts at handling these vessels in this kind of currents, but what helps us achieve that goal is the timely use of the vessel's power and the unlimited access to it. A couple of examples we've experienced. I was on a Panamax vessel Friday, 40,000 deadweight, about 190 meters long, with an engine rated for 9,800 horsepower. The fuel index was set at 75% of the engine on the Kongsberg engine control. While we were negotiating a 3-knot ebb, the computer would not let the engine maintain RPMs for full ahead. This is a vessel in ballast with winds less than 10 knots, only stemming a 3-knot ebb. Another example was a partially loaded vessel that departed the port with a UKC, which was about 20% of the vessel's draft. While a command for half ahead was given, it took the computer 90 minutes to reach the posted RPMs for half a head. It took the crew and on the bridge as well as the engine room to determine that it was actually the EEXI settings and not torque limiting, preventing the engine from reaching the RPMs. In the past, any failure to reach the posted engine RPMs during a transit would require a call to the Coast Guard and Class Society and be remedied before the vessel could move on or sail. Now what we're being told today, it's IMO and it's the computer. As you've already heard today, there's issues with pilots from around the country, whether it's not having enough power to safely turn a vessel out of an anchorage on a windy day, the lack of stern RPMs needed to safely stop a vessel gliding through calm water at 3 knots, or the kick of RPMs you need to maintain and negotiate a tight turn with vessels on either side of you. Not to mention just to have enough brunt power to overcome a sudden squall that might appear and hit you in the channel. Despite the significant reduction of the ship's power, we're also faced with another problem: the interpretation of the IMO's guidelines for CII and EEXI. Interpretation is vast and inconsistent, and in most cases, it's never correct. Ship owners are telling their officers they can never release the environmental limits, bypass the EPL or the shaft limiters. Some have plaques posted on the bridge, which you've seen today. Some vessel captains have been told they believe they will receive a MARPOL fine if they override the fuel index and engine power limiter. I had another captain tell me his vessel does not have the software yet installed, but was promised by the office when it is installed, it's only for monitoring and it will not limit the power. I think education's key here. As the gentleman from Excel Ship Services mentioned, he read that paragraph 3.1 from the IMO, use of power reserve unlimiting. But what he failed to read after that sentence of only allowed for ice, adverse weather, participation in search and rescue, the very next sentence, it's clear as day. The use of a power reserve should not have an adverse impact on the propeller, shaft, or related systems. It is important that the ship's master and officer in charge of the navigational watch are not restricted from exercising judgment to override the shaft limiter or EPL when required for safety purposes. I think that says it all. Before coming a pilot, I did go to sea as a captain. I'm keenly aware that vessels on the high seas are not completely safe. However, vessels are in their safest environment when at sea, transporting their cargo, able to maintain a 2-mile CPA in good weather. However, in the most congested ports of the country, it is critical to have all the vessel's power available. Just the same as it is to try to outrun a hurricane, to try to save a life at sea, or try to maneuver away from ice. Limiting the ship handlers from the full available power of the vessel will result in more vessel casualties, just as Captain Viso mentioned. It will result in more incidents and near misses. The EEXI regulations did not consider the complete scope of safety for the vessels. Safety is not only limited to the weather, ice, SOLAS, or pirates. Safety is also what required when you remove the world's largest man-made objects in some of the most confined waterways in the world. We as the Matagorda pilots look forward to working with the APA, our U.S. elected officials, the Coast Guard, and the state of Texas to review, improve, and regulate the local EEXI issues. We feel these initial IMO and Coast Guard requirements are dangerous for all vessels navigating one of the country's narrowest waterways with the country's strongest currents. Thank you for your time, gentlemen.
Yeah, Monica wanted to talk.
Yes.
You got
Captain, is he on?
Monica? Yeah,
Yeah, sure. Corpus. There's a couple people raised their hands.
he had a quick comment.
Monica.
Monaco.
Captain Monaco, are you out there in our,
He's looking.
yeah, he's right here. Okay. And David, if you could mute yourself, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments, sir. Captain Monaco, you can unmute yourself. We also recognize that we have people raising their hands online and all those, we do have a roundtable session coming up. We'll try to recognize everyone with the time allotted. And so, are you there, Captain Monaco? I don't see him on my list here.
Can you hear me, George?
Yes, sir. We can hear
Yeah,
you.
this is Forrest Albrecht. Kevin was on his phone, and I was walking into another meeting, just about to hang up. And so I'll just go ahead and speak for us, since I'm still sitting here. I don't want to take up anybody else's time. We want to reiterate what David and the other pilots before us said. We've definitely had lots of our own experiences with this problem, and really, like us, we're trying to wrap our head around, all this and the implications it's going to have here in Corpus. We experience all the time the ships not achieving the sufficient maneuvering RPMs, and it's a huge concern for our group. So we're actually in the process of evaluating our safety guidelines and the way we move, all the large vessels in this restricted channel as well. So it's been a concern, and we're really glad you guys are putting this on, and thank you for letting me speak. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. So we're right on schedule to where we thought we would be. It's 11 o'clock. We have a couple people that have raised their hand. I'm going to recognize them. Captain McHottery, if you would unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Mitush, and I'm speaking on behalf of AET Tankers here in the United States. I just want to. I mean, I heard both pilots came back with their concern on limited power, but we have the same system getting fitted on our ships as per schedule, and many of our ships are fitted with Chipotle power limiter. We have specifically instructed our vessels to use as if they deem necessary without any restriction, and we will manage the reporting from our end. So as an owner, we have given full liberty for masters to override if they need to any given time. I saw some very dangerous videos which the last pilot captain showed. That's very scary to see. But we have given full authority as an owner to our ship's master to use it. So I mean, it shouldn't be a concern, and I think more communication with owners would help in this matter.
Thank you, sir. Since Stolt was most of our examples, I think it's fair that we ask Mr. Christopher Stickney, if you would, sir. I understand that you are sustainability and decarbonization. If you want to come on up and speak with us a little bit from Stolt's perspective. All yours.
Good morning, everyone. Christopher Stickney, the business partner for sustainability and decarbonization, Stolt Tankers. So I like to mirror that comment that was just made also, that we at Stolt Tankers also give instructions to our masters that if any means necessary, they may increase power and they may go beyond their limits of the EEXI shell poly systems that we have installed currently on 59 of our ships, 12 of which currently transit in the Houston area. So mostly this is an international issue, and we are monitoring their limits whenever they're reached, and then we will handle the reporting internally. And we reiterate that if any means necessary, whether it's just there is no time limit to this when it comes to transiting. So it could be a few hours, it could be a few minutes, a few seconds. So this is we feel that this is an agreement between the captain and the pilot upon getting onto the ship, and how much power is actually needed for the transit in the ship channels.
Thank you. That's simple enough. Appreciate it. So we've heard from TK, we've heard from Stolt. Eric, would you like to unmute yourself and address us, please?
Thanks. Yeah, basically, I just want to echo what Mitusha mentioned. In the beginning, when we were making decision between EPL and Shapoli, the main criteria in making the decision was the ability to override. And we believe, and we installed on all our ships, basically AET with Shapoli, and as Mitush mentioned, basically the master has been given the authority to make the decision required to ensure that he will have all the powers needed to run the vessel to avoid, basically to ensure safety, whether it's in the river, in the ship channels, or anywhere else for whatever purpose. Yeah, so as you know, we got like 16 of vessels running in and out of the US Gulf. So I yet to see any feedback to say that this is not the case for the vessels, basically. So just to share that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Herb. Mr. Bala, you have some short comments to make? And if you can state clearly the company you're with.
Yeah, hi, my name is Bala Para. I'm with PMI, Deer Park, Pemex Deer Park. I'm the marine vetting guy there. One of the things I've seen is, and questions I have regard for flag, class, as well as the pilots and the COTP is it based on risk, that EPL is being done based on risk and the fuel being used? Because the emissions are different for the various fuels. So you can't have the same thing for LNG. That is one thing. Second thing, how much, let us say, how much authority do pilots have when one pilot master said that he can't, the currents are 3 and 6 knots. So can they give an advisor to the agent saying that when you're coming in, you need to exercise this EPL and inform the masters on the ship saying that when you're coming into my port, you should have this, or the captain of the port for that area should give an advisory. Is it possible to do that? That's a couple of questions I have.
Thank you, sir. We'll consider those during our roundtable discussion. Much appreciated. James, do you have something quick to say to us?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is James Prazak. I'm with Tricon Energy. So I'm a charter, just like the folks, some of the folks spoke. I think the number one thing we always keep in mind is safety is our top priority. We have one bad accident that was mentioned earlier. You have one bad incident, it can erase a lot of good gains. And ultimately, the officers on watch have to have unrestricted access to the engines. So the key point is, how do we get to some solutions? The Coast Guard can issue localized orders, instructions. You can get a national one from the Coast Guard, but this is an international issue. And so how do we, I think the big step is, how do we go to IMO and work on getting the rules amended so that they're clear that when you're in, constrained spaces, navigable channels like this, under pilotage, you need to have that unrestricted access. Not that you're going to use it unless you need it, but we need to make it so that, again, why do we have things like general averages? So that the vessel is encouraged to make the right decision for safety's sake. We need to give folks the right to use the full power of the engine if that's what they need to keep that voyage safe. So I think that's the big step we need to look at, is how do we take this back to IMO, get the right support, both from the industry side and flag states, class agencies, to go back to IMO and say, we're trying to do the right thing, but we need to go back and close this gap up so that we don't put people in harm's way and make this situation worse.
Thank you, sir. You've been well heard and we appreciate your comments. If you could, just for procedure, please mute yourself. Thank you very much.
Do we have someone from Coast Guard that would like to speak to this from a Marple perspective? Here, sir, I will bring you the microphone.
I think on the line we have Russell Armshare from Humra.
You do? Let's see if I can find him. What's his name again, sir?
Russell Armshare.
Russell, I'm looking for you on our grid of people. Can you raise your hand, Russell? It'll put you at the top of our list. There's a lot of people on here.
Right here. There two up on the bottom left.
Two up from the bottom left. Okay, bottom left. That's my left. Up.
There you go.
Okay, Russell, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Russell, can you speak? Can you tell us exactly what group you're with?
Good afternoon, Russell Hammerker. I'm with Commercial Vessel Compliance in the Port State Control Division. There's a lot of good information, a lot of good topics being addressed today. We want to definitely focus on what the concerns are from the industry level, and identify the rules and regulations in which we have to meet and follow. So we're going to utilize this time to gain that understanding and, listen to what's being said so that we can identify the way forward that we need to be focused on as we inform senior leadership. I know there's a lot of issues, a lot of topics. We look at the speeds, we look at the currents, and hopefully we'll be able to play in that supportive role that we need to in this one. Right now we're going to listen in and being listening mode for this conversation so that we can better understand what the concerns are with navigation and pilotage. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your comments. We're going to go back into our room here.
Hey, thank you. This is Captain Keith Donahue, Captain Report here in St. Houston, Galveston. And I can just give my local endorsement of the discussions you have in here. Obviously, you hear from headquarters, a delegation, they have to formulate a U.S. opinion and then work on the international level for that. But what is helpful, I think, what you say is the data and the stats and the real information. So getting together here and talking is one thing, but if you put your thoughts concisely down, whether it's a white paper or such, on what we're actually seeing here, what is the real concern, how many vessels, I think that's the important information that headquarters will need when the delegation talks and looks at this to bring the item up. So we've heard a call for data, which is seems like pilots would have to keep track of these problems. We'd be tracking in our dispatch system so that we can report on them. It's a big ask. You have something, sir? I was actually just scratching.
VP Regulatory Affairs for Offshore for Marshall Islands flag.
Yes, sir.
So basically echoing Mr. Donahue's comments, we're pretty much of the same opinion. And having been an IMO member state, we would probably we would definitely do something similar along the lines of really just being in a listening mode, taking the information that we're gathering here, and that's why we're here. And we're really appreciative and thankful because this is an issue. But we would work with the United States, other member states on an international level, gathering up in the information, reaching out to industry and seeing what the, because right now we're really talking just American ports for the most part here in this area. But on an internet, this may not be a localized issue. This could very well be issues globally, and that's where we would come in, work with, like I said, the United States, other member states, or at IMO to see if there's something that we can do on a global scale. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, document. Let me say that I said white paper. It's a position paper. It's a formal document that organizations can submit in to either Coast Guard or to IMO.
To the Coast Guard, question that came up prior to this meeting was about, does Coast Guard issue fines for violation of MARPOL? You have a policing effort, or do you issue fines based upon EPA violations, or are they both? Anyone in here want to talk about EPA versus how this happens, and is this a finable event?
Well, we can issue, my name is Mark Butler. I'm here at Sector East and Galveston Port State Control and in the inspection side. That, I mean, it's a complicated question as far as leveraging the Coast Guard's enforcement capabilities. So if we have reason to believe that there may be some.
Sir, I like this question. These look our podium.
Yeah.
So there are people out in TV land, right? I'm going to switch you to this microphone if you can speak into it. It would be very helpful for us. State your name again, sir.
So, can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's better for everyone out.
okay, great.
Zoom world, there you are.
Yeah, Mark Bottiglieri, like I said, US Coast Guard here at Sector Houston Galveston, Port State Control on the inspection side. So complicated question. I think the question was something, is there enforcement or is something, is it EPA, is it Coast Guard or something like that? So we could talk about this all day. That it is complicated. If we have reason to believe that there may be some violation of the US, the implementing code that kind of captures these laws, like the Act to Prevent Pollution from Ships or environmental laws that are administered by the EPA, we would work with our federal partners to decide if there's some sort of enforcement action. I'm trying to think of a way to kind of boil this down to a simple, but the answer would be there could be.
Can I join
There
you at
could
the
be.
mic?
Yeah, come on.
I think this is interesting. The first time I've ever thought that MARPOL and safety collided. So it's the first time ever, all my years at sea and the things I did, we considered MARPOL oil in the water, the old straight pipe, the magic pipe. We knew this was how we as operators visualized enforcement of MARPOL, have annual inspections by the Coast Guard that come in and inspect our systems to make sure that we didn't have MARPOL violations. And now we have a safety question coming up about emissions as now part of MARPOL. It seems to be that there's structurally, it is involved in your compliance. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Well, enforcement and compliance, you know, we use those terms interchangeably, but compliance is you have to look at compliance as a spectrum. Okay, so there's intervention measures. There's compliance measures. It could be, you know, issuing a Form B. That's a type of compliance. Okay, and compliance runs a spectrum. How the Coast Guard leverages its enforcement authorities to compel compliance or to verify compliance or to monitor compliance, it's a spectrum. So that's why I'm saying it's a difficult question. When we decide to, if we think we have an entity that is falling a little bit short of compliance, the Coast Guard then chooses based on mitigating and aggravating factors on how to leverage our enforcement. So again, whether that's, hey Cap, you mind, you know, close that valve, whatever it is, or written intervention, and it just runs a gamut. And things like civil penalties and criminal activity, those are obviously on, and operational controls, those tend to be on the further end of the compliance spectrum, as opposed to, like I said, some of the other intervention things we use. So emissions tends to be the domain, the 40 CFR Part 80, that tends to be the EPA. But listen, we have MOUs with these agencies. We work together with them. I mean, you mentioned MARPOL. You know, obviously everybody kind of is familiar with our magic pipe cases that they call. So, you know, those are the implementing code for that is, it tends to be the act to prevent pollution from ships, the apps, but also sometimes there's other criminal things that are involved. I hope I'm not being too circular, but that's a difficult question, but we're not going to sit up here and say, no, there's no enforcement or there's no, you know, violations. Well, you know, to speak in absolutes when you're talking about compliance is difficult. So I just want to make it clear that we would look for mitigating, aggregating factors that, and a lot of that's the data that the captain was talking about, collecting the data. So, you know, when I hear data like that, I'm like, oh, I've got some mitigating factors, things that make sense to me, you know, as an enforcement person, as somebody that would be charged with looking at potential non-compliance. So I hope
it does sound reasonable. How about our other agencies like the EPA? Would they have an interest in ship emissions and its regulation?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for other agencies, but I would imagine, and I think it would be worth reaching out. But again, I don't speak for the EPA, but I would think they would be.
We're aware of localities like in Los Angeles, I believe, where there's a concern about ships having their engines on while moored at the berth. This is truth. I know it goes down a rabbit hole. I think that's what the point is. There's a rabbit hole and we don't want to be what ifing it on the pilot side. That I've heard from pilots. They want more clarity on this. And that's just the nature of it.
And
but thanks so much.
Yeah, and the takeaway and we don't deal in absolutes.
Right.
All, never. I stay away from those.
Okay, so with respect to our time, it is 11:21. And we did plan to have some lunch catered here, so it has been delivered. So it will be something for us to eat at the bottom of the hour is our scheduled time. But we can go a little over if we need to. We have some people online that have raised their hand. We have people in the room. We're going to address the people in the room here first.
Hi, good morning. Lloyd Mendanza with BW LPG. I've heard quite a few of my fellow managers, ship managers and ship owners who have mentioned that they provide the master with an instruction to override in an emergency. But some of these overrides could be a physical removal of a device. Now, the question becomes is, what's the time? Because before the removal of that device, the vessel was MARPOL compliant. After the removal of the device, the vessel may not be MARPOL compliant. That's why you have a reporting and recording feature. The question is, what is the timeline? Because if it's a physical removal of something, now we leave it to the master and his crew to be able to exercise that removal in that time available or in that emergency that poses itself to the pilot. So that's a big question because it's from a master's perspective, it's a requirement to deviate from MARPOL, and then we hold him to that deviation. So that's my point.
Do we have enough to approach the microphone? Mr. Jim Brown, Houston Pilots.
I am Jim Brown. I know most everyone in here. I'm counsel for the Houston Pilots. Just from I've been thinking about this from a rules perspective. What I would see it was a deckie, so I don't understand anything what Jan said. But from a rules perspective, Rule 19, reduce visibility navigation. It says the vessel's got to be ready to immediately maneuver. It's right in the rule. Congress wrote it. A vessel has got to comply with the rules of the road at all times. Rule 8, action to avoid collision. It's got to be prompt and effective. Rule 6, safe speed. Vessel must be capable of taking effective action to avoid collision within the prevailing circumstances. So if the prevailing circumstances are a busy, congested ship channel with large volume of traffic and large ships where near misses is every job you have, it's a near miss, right? That's what you deal with is near misses. From a non-technical person, I think that it's got to be able to be overridden for the entire transit. It's only 5 or 6 hours. And I'm not downplaying the importance of this regulation, but I've tried collision cases as well. And I tried a collision case once where the other side's chief mate testified that they couldn't avoid this collision. And the question was, why don't you just go full astern? And he said, the vessel can't go full astern. You've got to override the load program. And it's just, and the federal judge, and was here in Houston, she found that vessel did not comply with the coal regs. The collision would happen in the coal rig area. So for the ship managers, you might want to consider that. I mean, you have to comply. And if your vessel can't immediately maneuver, a federal judge who's just going to read the rules, it will say you're not complying with the coal regs. But anyway, this is great. I'm enjoying learning a lot of stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I have another comment.
Thank you again. This is Tom Rand, Marshall Islands again. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to speak again. Just a couple of general comments. So number one, my experience at IMO is that they're not immune from creating a problem while solving an initial problem. Okay, so that's number one. Just wanted to, there's an understanding there that for us who've been there, IX members probably understand that better than I do. Also, all these vessels that you're dealing with, they're all ISM code, right? So in the ISM code, it gives the master overriding authority to do what's necessary for safety, environmental protection of the vessel and the crew. And I think that's important. It's been known for decades. And us as a flag state, we would support that in the event that there was some sort of violation or anything. But there's also the other thing I want to mention is when we look at regulations and requirements, particularly with IMO, when we're interpreting them, enforcing them, we look at spirit and intent in good faith. Did those individuals act in good faith to meet the requirement, the spirit and intent of the regulation? And that's kind of how we approach it. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Mr. KC Wong from Intertanko. KC, you out there in Singapore? KC helped us prepare for this meeting. It was very helpful. Good evening, sir. It's very late there. Yes. I have to ask you to unmute.
Oh, hi. Hi, good evening here from Singapore. Yeah, just I think this is a very good session. I think I also still continue to learn as well, even though I did share a bit of what we have saw amongst our Intertanko members, especially members like AET. I think they are all doing the right thing in terms of risk management. And just a quick word on what I think just came to mind. We spoke a little bit about this in the previous session with Houston Harbor Pilots in another separate session. I think in terms of how IMO has developed the EEXI regulations, I think does have its limitations, like what the Marshall Islands have just mentioned. It may lead to some unintended consequences, I guess. One of which I just put in the chat box, some information about there's actually a old IMO regulation or resolution, which is developed by a IMO committee that's separate from the MEPC committee that came up with the EEXI, because MEPC does just look at environmental matters. So EEXI air pollution is one of the things that came out. But of course, with the unintended safety impact, which is actually covered by a resolution which tests on which require new ships to undergo maneuverability tests. So they have various criteria like time taken for zigzags and a turning circle radius and so on. So those were tests done at the new building stage when the ship is launched from new build. So once the ship is launched, there's no requirement for the ship to be tested again for maneuverability. In this case, EEXI does change the maneuverability characteristic because the testing speed, which is where the maneuverability test was done, was at a different maximum speed. I think for most flags, and they probably may not require the ship to undergo another maneuverability assessment when the EEXI causes the ships to reduce their speed. So I think this may be an angle we may have to look at, that we have to encourage probably member state to consider that there may be a angle on risk management that they have to look after, which probably may not have come to mind when these EEXI regulations came in. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong, and for your comments regarding, in particular, what I heard was that the ship maneuverability standard is done by tank test, it's done by formula, it's done at a research facility, and that there's a connection here between the power D rating and that. That's what we're hearing from UKC, is that correct? Should I have that right? Okay, thank you, sir. And thank you for staying up in the middle of the night to talk to us. We appreciate that. I'm going to ask James to speak one more time, and then while you're speaking, James, I'm also going to look in our chat room. Go ahead, James.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I mean, I've appreciate all the comments that have been made. I think they're all very, very good. Again, I think we know the problem. I think we have a short-term issue and a longer-term issue. Short-term issue is how do we convince, the individual master and officers on the ship that it's okay to bump those limits in order to keep the ship safe when they're inside of a port area maneuvering or dealing with incidents or potential incidents. And I think that's where the Coast Guard could help us out, whether that's, do we need to have something issued captain of the port by captain of the port, sector by sector, or can we have a national document come out? And does the Coast Guard need industry and the pilots and everybody else to send in letters first, or does the Coast Guard have enough information to say we need to reiterate that do what's right for the safety of the vessel and safety of the port area, and we'll be okay with that. The longer term issue then is again going to IMO and trying to the regulations amended and updated. Personally, I think the override control or the ability to turn that on and off really ought to be on the bridge. It ought to not be on the engine itself as far as a mechanical linkage, because you want to have that instant access. You want it to fail to the safe position, which means giving the officer unrestricted access to the engine to do what he has to do. If the system fails, go to full power, or not change it to full power, but give him access to full power. Because again, that's what keeps us safe as an industry and protects the waterway, protects the people in the area. So I think that's the big question, is how do we move forward short term to get the word out that this is what we need to do to keep things safe. And then the longer term issue is how we go to IMO, and that's the longer term process because it takes a lot of time, we all know, but how do we get that ball rolling now to get those changes in place?
Thank you. Mr. Prezek, will you remind us again what company you're with?
I'm sorry, I'm with Tricon Energy in Houston. So I'm a charter of vessels. Tricon.
What type of vessels do you chart? Are you mostly involved in?
Product tankers, chemical carriers primarily.
Okay, thank you, James. Much appreciated comments. If we're just looking here to the chat, Mr. Casey reiterated his position about maneuverability criteria and a speed is at 90% of ship speed corresponding to 85% of their engine output. And there's some back and forth in our chat room with people that are discussing that issue. And I know I've done quite a bit of ship modeling from ship's data, and we have known vessels that have power limitations. There's vessels that have been banned from Houston due to maneuverability standards, yet they meet their minimum IMO maneuvering standard, but they were not allowed in this channel. So we know that there's still a gap as well. Does anyone else have a question or testimonial where they'd like to get their voice out there before we conclude our meeting?
I want to make a quick comment.
Come on in, Captain Winiger.
Clay wants to say something. This is mainly for the pilots online and in the room. A lot of discussion so far was really about wanting extra revolutions to be able to make those turns and maneuverability. But some of the events that we experienced, which had some major concerns from us, was part of this emissions was also restricting the ability from going from, say, maneuvering full to half ahead or even to slow ahead was a time delay because they wanted the engine temperatures to come down slowly, so there wasn't a big emissions output. We had situations where we were trying to reduce speed while we're approaching all these dredge operations we have in the channel, and we had no idea that there was a delay on reducing the revolutions. So it almost caused a big major event approaching a dredge. We almost swamped a dredge and potentially, hurt somebody. So it's not only going faster or having that additional kick, but it's also in reducing. It's a concern as well. Understanding when you get on that vessel, if there's any limitations going up or down because of this.
Yes, sir, Captain Donovan, headed to you.
Donahue, 2 O's. Phil Donahue. Houston Galveston, we also have an MSIB. I think our colleagues from New Orleans mentioned that there was MSIB put out from New Orleans. We followed suit with just getting this little additional clarifying language. And again, I'll just quote a little bit on that, is that owners and operators of shipmasters are reminded that before embarking, a pilot when entering or getting underway in navigable waters and VTSA, main propulsion machinery should be available to immediately respond to the full range of maneuvering commands, and that any load limiting programs or automatic acceleration limiting programs that would limit the speed of response to engine orders beyond that needed to prevent immediate damage to propulsion immediately are capable of being overridden immediately. Machinery are capable of being overridden immediately. So that's the guidance put out here. I think follow suit with New Orleans.
Hi, I'm Mark Saunders with the Galveston Tech City Pilots. After 18 years, I was just starting to get comfortable on the channel. I'm all of a sudden nervous again. And I think what gives me comfort is I know the people in this room are looking for a solution. The remarks by the owners and operators that they have given full faith to their masters. As a merchant seaman, that's near and dear to my heart, because like Jim Brown was saying, the master's concerned with obeying the rules of the road. Rule number 2, the rule of good seamanship that comes to mind for me, the prudent action of any mariner. So that's the common sense solution. I can tell you, like was remarked before, if a vessel could not maneuver in a normal fashion to what we would normally expect from a ship, that would be considered a special case. Assets would be called into play to mitigate, so we don't have an incident like what happened on the river. We would take precautions. We would work with the Coast Guard VTS to make sure that we didn't put everybody else in danger. It's not just about that ship. So what I see happening in the short term is if that MSIB cannot be complied with and this new regulation is going to be hard and fast, and there's a not clear communication from the Coast Guard where the authority of the master to deviate from this based on his authority, that should, I think my guys would consider as a special case. We would have to plan for current traffic restrictions and the like for safety reasons.
So I do want to recognize that Mr. Clay Diamond has had his hand up for about 20 minutes and all the blood's draining out of his fingers. So you will be called on soon. We have one here, Captain Toby, on your way to you. Yes. You want to speak? Yeah. Who else in the room is going to want to speak?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Toby Watney, president of the New Orleans Baton Rouge Steamship Pilots. The same gentleman as my colleague that showed you the video of that ship that was transiting down the Mississippi River. Well, we tried to mitigate, like you're saying, with that. And as you could see in the video, we narrowly missed a ship. We narrowly missed a bridge. We could put 2 tractor tugs on these ships, but it's still unsafe. It's not safe. We need to use common sense. We cannot have these limiters in a 5-knot current transiting with 800,000 barrels of oil going down the Mississippi River. This is ludicrous. It's just unsafe. Every pilot group in America, first thing we preach, you can ask Captain Clint, safety first. This is not safe. This is unsafe. And it's just a matter of time before something really tragic happens, and then we'll all react. I'm asking everyone to be proactive now. I don't know what studies Jan has towards the emissions. I've seen some of it, but how many studies were done on safety by doing these procedures? I don't see that. I don't remember or recall anyone coming to the Mississippi River asking the pilots first, if we reduce 25% of your revolutions, how safe will this be? I don't know if any other groups have had that study. I mean, we need to use common sense here. This is going to be an accident. We need to have a restriction before ships enter the Mississippi River that these limiters are turned off and adhere to the rules that this gentleman was just talking about. We have to have full ahead, half ahead on command, not 30 seconds like the gentleman over here referred to his ship, a manual laborer going down there when it's too late. We need to have it on command. I appreciate Captain Ogwin years ago. He is now Admiral in Washington. He put out that MSIB. I recall when he did it. But there's a little niche to it. They still come into the river. They need to have these limiters turned off before entering the river. Because once you're in here and the pilot discovers, oh, we can't go to half ahead for another 30 seconds or another 30 minutes, how ridiculous is this? So I'm pleading with the Coast Guard, I'm pleading with the NTSB. We need to move on this fast, swiftly. We need to implement an MSIB that's strong enough to ensure the safety of these ships. We've always had a wonderful safety record. We pride ourselves in safety. And I'm sure every other pilot group in America does the same. But we need a little help here. So I'm pleading with someone in the Coast Guard, NTSB, or these other regulatory bodies, please enact something quickly, not after it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Toby. Captain Clay Diamond, I'm going to ask you to unmute Council American Pilots Association.
Thanks, George. Can you hear me? You're good. Okay. Well, first off, that was awesome, Captain Watney. Awesome presentation. As Kevin Beaster said, we've been working on this for a bit. We've worked, we originally got some notice from the West Coast, kind of late spring, and so we've been working on this, and we had kind of formulated some main points, some key ideas that we needed to convey to headquarters. We've had an ongoing dialogue, and we have a large meeting with them scheduled early October with a number of offices, including commercial vessel compliance. But we had kind of put together some main points and ideas that we needed to cover and get, with the Coast Guard. And we're really happy to see that virtually all of them, or just three, they were validated by a number of the speakers here. So this conference was very, very helpful. So thank you, George, for putting this on. But kind of the three things that we think we need to get to the Coast Guard to help to make them understand is one, I think there's going to be a perception, well, I know there's a perception by some, at least in the Coast Guard, that maybe this is just just a matter of pilots getting used to piloting ships with less power. This is a change. So pilots just maybe need to learn how and get some more experience with this. Well, maybe that's true in a very small number of circumstances, but overall, we know, and you know, we need to convince the Coast Guard that the overwhelming majority that's not true. There's just simply not enough power when these are limited. So that's one of the first points that we need to make. The other point that was kind of alluded to here earlier, that we need to make sure that they understand that having full power available throughout the entire piloted run doesn't mean full power is going to be used throughout the entire piloted run. So having that power available for when it's needed is going to be critical, but that doesn't mean that there'll be the full emissions and full power going out throughout the entire piloted run. And the last and really the most important point, and this was touched on by a couple of people, is what we need to do is get clear guidance from the Coast Guard that under this regulatory regime here, that the phrase that's used is you can exceed these power limitations if it's necessary for securing the safety of the ship. What we have to convince the Coast Guard of as a port state, port state authority is very broad. We need to try to convince the Coast Guard that securing the safety of the ship shouldn't just be limited to MARPOL Annex 6 Regulation 3.1, which talks about emergency situations and ice and search and rescue, that it needs to be interpreted more broadly, at least here, to mean ensure that there's adequate power available in restricted or piloted waters. We have to clearly, we have to get a direct and clear statement from the Coast Guard that securing the safety of the ship means more than MARPOL Annex 6 Regulation 3.1. Now, IMO was also brought up, and APA is on the U.S. delegation to all of the key IMO meetings. And we also have a seat at the table as a member of the IMPA delegation to IMO. So we're certainly going to have plenty of voices at IMO. But as a number of people here said, and I'll reiterate, IMO was specifically designed to be slow and deliberative. Nothing's going to happen quickly at IMO. We need to work on those things, but the answer to this problem, in our view, has to be clear direction from the Coast Guard. Whether that's some sort of national safety bulletin or alert, or work through the various captains of the port. But the answer to this is going to be clear direction from the Coast Guard, which then in turn will give the ship masters something to rely on directly. So again, thanks very much for putting this on. Very helpful, and we were glad to see that there's a number of Coast Guard folks on here as well, and I hope they've heard both the real life experiences that you all brought to the table, as well as some of the policy points that a number of us are trying to make. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Clay. So we have about 70 people out in the world. Some people have their hands raised, but we're really to be respectful of those that are in the room and our time here, I believe we should probably conclude our meeting. So if you do have a question that was unanswered or a comment, if you can enter it in the chat, that will be part of the recording of this. Also, I will make sure that Jan's presentation is attached to this as a downloadable document. It's in a PDF format. And yes, that's what we're looking at. Any other thoughts in the room with all of us together? Yes, sir. Last one.
Check. Yeah, hi, Nawal Aranke again with Executive Shipping. Just a suggestion that some of the ships have physical limiters placed and they take between 10 and 15 minutes to remove. So if the pilots can send out through the agents, the ships with these physical limiters, they need to remove the limiters before the pilot boards the ship. So that will kind of help getting into a sticky situation at the end collar. So kind of, you know, if they have those limiters out before pilot boards, it'll help everyone. Thank you.
And Mr. Bala had his hand raised. He said, did pilots identify areas of concerns in the port where EPL needs to be bypassed? And it's echoing your concern as we'd like advance notice, I think is what I'm seeing, preparation and no surprises. So we have Rudy's Barbecue here. It's a great opportunity for us to commiserate and have lunch. So we're going to conclude this meeting. Thank you very much. It was very productive. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
For those of you in Zoom, we're going to go ahead and we're going to close this down. Thank you.